stand on your 2 feet and look up to the sky. Open up your heart and let your spirit fly.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Bob Noonan
and Roger McDermott.
and welcome back to Stepping Out Ministries. As I say each time, this is a ministry where we're stepping out of the darkness into the light. And it's typically about recovery, but it's not just about recovering from drugs and alcohol, codependency. It's about any trauma in our lives that's going to impede us from getting healed through the grace of Jesus Christ and applying that atonement from Him into our lives. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. And He says He will heal the wounds of the brokenhearted, bind and heal their wounds. So, Roger, help me today introduce one of my favorite people. When I did radio for 10 years, Jan, I had you on a few times, but Jan and Don Frank, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Jan and
Thank
Don.
you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
to be here.
Well, you kind of retired now, aren't you, Jan, or do you still speak?
I'm pretty much retired, but I still, when I'm invited, I still love to speak. And since we've moved from Southern California to Northern California, I don't have as many opportunities and don't have some of the core that I had down there, but it's good.
Well, Jan, I think when I first read your book, Door of Hope, I thought it was a seminal book. I put it up there with Claudia Black's work. I put it up there with Dr. Judith Woteitz in Adult Children of Alcoholic Families, which I'm really glad she broadened that out to adult children from dysfunctional families. Because when we go through those 13 characteristics, I'm going like, you know, my father was an alcoholic. So I grew up in that home, and about 3 times a week, 4 times he'd come home pretty drunk. And my mom and him would fight till about 3 in the morning. We always wondered why we were tired at school, right? And then we just got through talking about this. At 4 years old, I woke up with my step-grandfather to him molesting me. And that went on for 6 years. And when I read your book, I mean, you know, I was already a therapist, and you know what's interesting, Jan? When I went to work for a Christian agency, and we were doing hospital work, a lot of hospital work. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll work there, but I'm not working with any alcoholics, and I'm not working with anyone who is molested. In 6 months, I was running the substance abuse program, the eating disorder program. And Jan, your book's really about not just your recovery, but about the hope in recovery as you lay out how you were molested as a child. For those that are just viewing this, bring us up to date and talk about that early journey and what happened to that little girl.
Well, my parents, my biological parents, divorced when I was 5. And so my mom ended up, being a single mom, didn't really have a relationship with my biological father until after I became an adult. And so she ended up remarrying. I think she knew this man who became my stepfather because he had worked with my biological father. And so anyway, she married my stepfather, and really the first few months, the first year, there was good things. There were good things that happened. We began attending church as a family, and that really was pivotal in my life, because it was through that church attendance that I asked Jesus into my heart at the age of 10. And I knew that that was a life-changing experience. It was shortly after that time that my mother and my older sister went to a mother-daughter tea at our church, and my stepfather was at home babysitting me and my younger brother, who was the product of my stepfather and my mother. And my stepdad called me out of my room, my bedroom, in the pretense of watching television with him and proceeded to sexually abuse me. Now, he had been a deacon in a church, and of course, he threatened me. I did not know at the time that my stepfather was also abusing my older sister, who ultimately became an alcoholic, uh, just yeah, 5 times married, and just had a horrific life. She died of a stroke about 3 years ago, and never got never got help. And so um, at that time, of course, I was threatened not to tell anyone, um, and it continued, and actually until I moved out of the home at 18. Um, and I did end up telling my mom at a later time, um, but you know, it was she didn't want to go through another divorce, and so she just stayed married. And also, I had a younger half brother who was the product of their marriage, and
Did you feel
so
at that time betrayed by your mother, or that she chose him over you?
oh, absolutely,
Oh my
absolutely.
gosh.
It was horrific in that, um, I really had no one at that time. My biological
Yes.
dad wasn't in the picture. Um, my mom was so committed to him, and really, I remember one year I had to ask, could I come over for Thanksgiving?
Hmm.
Because I was really cut out of the picture. And I wanted my mom and I to have a relationship, but um, basically, I was told if you don't see him, you don't see me. So I had to make
Or
that decision. Well, I don't want to see him, so I guess
Yeah.
I'm not able to see you.
Jan, let's go back, because that's so important. What you said is you were threatened. In my case, it was a step grandfather who molested me. And here's a guy who taught me how to fish, ride a bike, and do all these things and go on trains. And so, but I also realized at 5 years old, if I told my mom and dad, my father would have killed him. I mean, no, there's no question my father would have killed him. So at 5, I'm thinking I'm responsible for this guy's life.
Wow.
Well, I mean, you've had so many patients come to you that come out of the same um, circumstances. So tell us now, what was
response.
your road to healing, Jan? How did that start?
Well, Don just commented, initially, because of what had occurred in my life, I became very promiscuous as a young woman, and uh, it was it was a way of acting out and having control. That sounds so
Yes.
strange, probably, but yeah. So that also took.
Isn't that an interesting defense, that you learned as a little girl that that's what men want, but you can control them with that as you're older? And I've always seen women either do that or they become nuns. I mean, they'll
Right.
put on a
Oh, the
massive
other.
amount of weight to not become attractive. I remember
Exactly.
one of the gals we had in there, she was a nurse and she was 350 pounds. she'd been molested for years as a little girl, and I asked her, "So what is this about your weight?" She said, "It's not my weight, it's my armor." Isn't that
Abs-
interesting?
yes, yes. I met many in my practice that was true of them as well. And we had to get to, okay, we need to go back there. We need to
Yes.
work through your experience. You need a safe place to be able to talk about it, to be able to cry, to be able to be angry. So we did a lot of role playing, putting the abuser in a chair or empty
Oh,
chair. And
Gestalt work.
yes, yes, yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And um,
I
as I said,
hated that stuff
yeah,
because they always
mm,
chose me to be the abuser in the chair and telling the person they liked it. I mean, all the therapists were lined up because they had irritable bowel syndrome in the morning. So it affected us all. But, it's. But Jan, I want to go back. I want to ask you something because I ran um, for Charter Hospital at the time, the Christian Psych program. So we had a lot of eating disorders in there. We ran about 80% of all the girls were molested, and they all came from Christian homes. And the other program that was just a generalized program, they had far less molestations. And I thought, I can't understand that. I couldn't understand it then, but we have a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing in the church. Um, and you were there at the time when Chuck's good friend was kicked out because he had
yes,
molested. But Chuck
yes,
handled that well. He went to the pulpit and exposed the whole thing. That
yes,
brought healing.
yes, it did.
So keep going. One of my favorite stories because, but I'm digressing. But when we don't heal, because I'm going to get Don in here, because we have our own way of talking and not talking and holding secrets when we're not healed, right? And one of the funniest stories you guys tell is you're out someplace and like Dawn asked you, "What do you want to do?" She said, well, you're on your way home. She says, "Well, I'm hungry." Do you remember that?
Yep. Oh yeah, that's I don't know anybody from Anaheim down there, but it's Mama Koza's in Anaheim. Great place to go have
Yes.
Italian food. And Jan hinted that she was hungry, and she really wanted to go to Mama Koza's, and never would tell me that. And finally, she got upset
But you
with
were
me.
supposed to know.
You're not
Yeah,
supposed
you were
to
supposed
read
to
her
read
mind.
my mind. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, so that she got upset with me because I didn't take her for pizza or whatever, and she never asked me to. So anyway, that it was. I still like
Well,
Mama. I wish I was there right now, as a matter of fact.
yeah, there you go. But that's part of it. Do we see in really dysfunctional homes?
Yep.
People read each other's body language and all that, and don't say this or it's all the no's and don'ts, and being a good girl is being something else, right? And so, yeah, Don, I bet you had to be constantly reading between the lines. So, how did you guys overcome that? Now, Jan, I'm hearing this. What is it you really want?
Well, I think, and I'll say this even now, kind of front loading. What I saw in Don was a man that could be trusted, and that was so important. I had dated a lot, and um, you know, I don't think I was looking for the perfect man because I knew there was no such thing. But Don was and is a man of integrity, and he was trustworthy, and that was so important to me because really I had never had that. As I said, my biological dad left at 5. Um, and really, I told this to Don soon after we were dating, and I shared a little bit with him. I said, you're unlike any man. that I've known, because what you promise to do, you follow through on. And that was, and his integrity was, just so meaningful to me that, if he said he would do something, he did it.
Yeah, I always believed. I was a coach, and I always believed that you better walk the walk, and if you're going to talk the talk, you better do it, and be an example to the young men on my team. So that was something that was very important to me. However, I have to say, like you, Bob, I grew up in an alcoholic family as well. My father was a naval officer, and probably he was loved his country. He loved his country and he loved alcohol probably more than he loved his family, or how he demonstrated his love to his family. And so I really had issues with trust as well. We both did. And that was because promises broken or never even made by my father. And it was, that those wounds have been deep and still are there. And he's been gone from this earth for 30 some years, dealt with sepsis from alcohol poisoning. So it's still sad in my life that took place. But the way of approaching life is, if you say something, you're going to do it and follow through. Maybe I overdid with that because of my father, but yes, that was important to me. What you say you're going to do.
It's interesting. My dad and I were never close. My dad was drafted out of Columbia University to the New York Yankees.
Wow.
They told him he was their next shortstop. Well, then the war broke out, and they said, well, Paul, we got this guy. His name's Phil Rizzuto, but he's only going to be with us a few years. Yeah, right?
Pretty good
He
player.
played 20 years.
Hall of Famer.
A Hall of Famer. And so my dad went to West Point, and he was so bright that they made him a teacher, a professor there. And then he played on the Army team, and you had Ted Williams and all those guys on the team. So the only time I was really close to my dad was if I really played well in sports and I really achieved. So it was baseball, football. But I want to just bring in Roger here, a dear friend. As I said, we've been doing ministry together for 20 years. And, Roger is coming up on 28? 29 years of sobriety.
Yeah.
And this guy is probably the best sponsor. He loves the Lord so much. He knows recovery like the back of his hand. And, my father used to say when he got into AA, guys would come to the house. Paul, my father's name was Paul. Paul, I think my wife is going to leave me. He says, well, we can't deal with that today, but tell me what you're going to do today to stay sober. Or, Paul, I think I'm going to get fired. Well, we can't deal. What are you going to do to stay sober today? And that's the kind of guy Roger is. But, Don and Jan, Roger and I were talking earlier, and the idea of if we stay unhealed, if we stay in the trauma, that dominates our life. And there's only two ways to go: addiction or codependency. The addict wants to use a substance to medicate what's going on inside. The codependent wants to control the environment around to medicate what's going on.
Yes.
You see that, right?
Absolutely. I would be the control guy.
Well, you're a coach.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Why do you think I became a coach? There's something to that, I think.
What school were you at?
I was at many schools, Bob.
Okay.
I went to the University of Redlands. I played a little hoops there.
Oh,
And then I was the head basketball coach at Redlands High School, right down the hill from
wow.
here. And then I was at Orange High School. I was at Santa Ana College with Dana Paget. I don't know if you remember him, great player.
Wow,
I was at various other. I was at Rio Hondo College in Whittier, and my last gig was 10 years at Concordia University in Irvine.
Oh,
I was the old man on the staff there. But I did 40 years of coaching.
One of my favorite coaches of all time, because I would go to the games, Ernie Johnson at El Rancho High School.
I got an
Remember
Ernie Johnson story that I can't tell on the air, but yeah, what great coach. El Rancho High
Well,
School.
you know, they all became, a lot of those guys, yes, you
Yeah.
know, and why I was thinking Ernie just now, because El Rancho would end up playing Redlands High School for the
Yes.
championship.
For
Two
Anaheim.
of the biggest
Yeah.
powerhouses. Every
Yeah.
once in a while, they'd play St. Paul's where Roger went.
Yeah,
You
if
went
you
to
know
St.
Ernie
Paul?
Johnson, you know
Yeah.
Marion Ansich at St. Paul.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. And then he went to Tustin and turned it into St. Tustin's.
Yeah, exactly
After
right.
St.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Oh,
Yeah,
I know. Yeah.
yeah. I went to
Absolutely.
St. Paul, so
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is another show. I could do the whole.
yeah.
I don't know if
we
we edit
digress.
this, but anyway.
Well,
Yeah, we can
no,
do
no, we're not going to edit this because this is part of life. But the idea here is, if we don't go through the process of coming to Him, you know, the idea here is if we stay hidden, if we wear a mask, John Lynch, who wrote True Face, says the problem with wearing a mask is only the mask gets loved. Does that make sense, Jan?
Yeah.
You know, so, and, you know, when we come from trauma, we either, and you've seen this being a coach, there are kids who just give up and don't try anymore. There's no point in it. Or there's a kid that's the overachiever and he's trying to be loved by achieving something, but he's never quite good enough. So, Jan, when did you become good enough?
Well, I do want to say that, you know, in the after we married, you know, most of what had happened, I just kind of buried it and moved on. But once we married, and the flashbacks began coming, and anytime there was even a chance of being intimate with Don, I would just shut down. I just had so much anxiety and so many things going on in my head, and poor Don at that time did not know anything. And so finally I got got the courage to tell him what had happened in my family. And I have to say he was the most loving, understanding, caring man that I had known up to that point in my life. And
Yes.
he said to me, I've never forgotten this. He said to me at that time, he said, "Jan, tonight doesn't matter because I plan to live the rest of my life into
Oh,
the
wow.
blessed way."
Well, there's a protector there too, Jan. He's not going to take advantage of you. We just did an interview with one of our best friends, Pastor Joe Fury, who was molested as a little boy in Santa Ana. He ended up working and he went to drugs. He ended up getting clean and sober. He became the president of the Orange County Mission, and then was the pastor of this recovery church that started in a little church in Huntington Beach. It's called His Place, and then moved to Westminster. And he has a saying, Don and Jan. He says, "We're born into relationships, we get hurt in relationship, and then we heal in relationship. The problem is we don't always stay in relationship to get the
Yeah.
healing.
I could see that.
Yes.
You know, there's this idea that bear up one another is a wonderful scripture verse that we have to carry people for some time, until. But the wonderful thing about recovery is when we tell our story. I was with Roger. We were at um, Salvation Army. So you got a whole room full of guys. And, I was one of the speakers, and this was probably 7 years ago. And I happened to mention that I had been molested. I had a line of 20 guys that wanted to talk to me, and they said that they had never told anyone that. So, Jan, we know that the molestation that happens to little boys and girls is pretty close statistically. Girls will talk about more. Boys, like Pastor Joe was molested by a priest, and John Lynch told me he had been molested, and he said, I kept that a secret all through high school, all through college, all through Talbot Theological. And it wasn't after I had been married some years that I come out with the truth. Because he
Wow.
said, I thought that would cancel me. It would make me persona non grata. Do you
Yeah,
understand? You understand.
yeah, absolutely. I think especially for men, because men are often, taught as even little boys that you're strong and you should be able to protect yourself and some of those things. And so I think for men, I think there's some similarities in the way that those of us who are women deal with it and the way men deal with it. But um, I think there's still, for both sexes, there's still shame attached, even though you did not cause it. There's still the shame um, that you carry. Like, what
Well, I
did I?
think there's always that summer of 42 where every high school kid wishes his teacher would come on to him, the female teacher. But when you're a little boy and there's an older man coming on, then you question your orientation, And Roger, tell Dawn and Jan about, I wasn't here that one time and you opened up a group.
Yeah.
And what happened?
We did a stepping out, and there was a number of people, and one gentleman decided he was going to share, and he put his hand up and he started explaining and talking about that he had been molested as a child, and he went through sort of the scenario, the family effects, and everything. And as he wrapped up, another hand went up, and that gentleman said, the first one who shared said, "This is the first time I've ever told anybody in the whole wide world." And a second gentleman put his hand up and said the exact same thing. There were four guys that night that shared about being molested that had never shared with anybody in their entire life before. And there's a line that I use and a lot of people use: you have to reveal to heal. And in watching them share, you could see relief on their face and on their persona. I'll never forget that night. It was, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 months ago, but one gentleman shared and then 3 more followed. And
Oh, yeah.
they all went like,
Yeah.
it was amazing.
Well,
But secrets
and when
will kill us and keep us in prison, correct?
Yep. When I confronted my parents, I said to my stepfather, that this was not normal, et cetera, et cetera. And through that conversation, he admitted that he had been abused by
Mm-hmm.
one of his aunts and his grandmother when he was a little boy. And so, I said, Dad, even at this point in your life, you need help. You don't just get over those things. You need help. Now, he
Wow.
never went. My mother was also a victim of abuse. And that's another thing that we see often, that victims marry victims. And
It's generational, isn't it?
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
we wrote a book years ago called "When Victims Marry." it's it's out of print now, but we talk about just how, when you've been brought up in dysfunction, whether it's the exact same or it's just dysfunction, that, there's some familiarity, I guess. You get drawn together. And thankfully, Don was very, very supportive of me getting help. And he also got help for himself
Well,
because of the alcoholism.
Jan and Dawn, the idea here is, how do we believe in a God, the Father, that we can't see, touch, hear, or smell, when the earthly Father we could see, touch, hear, smell, either wasn't there, was critical, was angry with us, and we're going to project that earthly Father to the Heavenly Father and sometimes not want much to do with Him.
Yes,
And so
you're right.
there's
Yeah.
that healing. Pastor Joe was talking about how he went through and, his son died of an overdose after he had been sober for a while. And then 7 years later, his daughter, who was a surgical nurse, a cardiac nurse in the Navy, her and her husband were deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. He was 9 times over there, had severe PTSD, and they were living in Texas. Make a long story short, she was called her mom and dad. It happened to be a Sunday morning, so it's 6 here and it's 8 there. The bottom line is the husband snuck into the house and killed her while they were on the phone with her. They listened to the gunshots, right?
Oh.
And Joe said, and he's pastor. He says, I hated that guy. Well, he was real about that. And he said, one of the great things is when we get angry with God, we don't realize God's okay with that.
Yeah, he's big enough to handle it.
God can handle my anger and disappointment and pain. But Joe said, I learned in my life to forgive the Catholic priest. And by the way, that Catholic priest in Santa Ana was considered the most prolific child molester in all the West Coast, maybe in the entire church. And so this idea, did you get to a place where you forgave your stepfather?
Yes, I certainly did, but there
No.
were still boundaries in place.
Of course.
And I said, my children will never stay in your without me present.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said to me at that time, well, I'd never do that to your children. And I said, not good enough, Dad.
So, hey, we got to start wrapping up. Go ahead.
I think her relationship with her dad was probably as good as it could have been, considering what had happened and his issues with his own life. He didn't want to hang out with me a whole lot.
We can imagine why.
But I didn't respect him. Okay. And so I think Jan did a much better job with her dad than I did. I just didn't respect the man, honestly. And I really didn't care to spend a lot of time with him.
What do you say to men who've married somebody like your wife, Jan, who's come in with trauma? And what is your counsel to those men that are listening to this today?
When we got married, I had a vision in my mind of what marital bliss was going to be like. And honestly, it wasn't. I mean, we were great together, but the sexual relationship wasn't what I thought it would probably be. It wasn't great, and that was like it was a disappointment. And many of the men that I would speak to that have had this same situation, it's very similar. I mean, our sex drives are, especially younger, there's men's needs and it's not getting met. So what's going on? I thought, okay, I had a spinal cord injury. I still do. I deal with some issues from I limp and I have numbness all over from my waist down a lot. And so, but see, I tell men this, nobody can see that. So look at me, you think I'm fine. Just don't ask me to pick anything up. Okay. But I look good, but I've got an injury. Nobody sees it. Sometimes I wish I was in a cast or something and people could see it. my wife had an injury, and it was a deep emotional injury. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't even really see the scars. But yet I knew that if there was anything that could help with me recovering from what I had, that she'd be 100% behind it. So for me, I just said, okay, well, I can't see. I don't see any scars. I don't see any broken legs. You're hurt, but I don't see the injury out there. But I understand what it's like when people can't see the hurt. So I transferred that from her to me, and I said, at least I can do is support this woman, and she needs help. Let's do it. But I thought help was go in a couple of visits, and it's like getting your oil change. You're going to be fine. It's okay. Just get the oil changed and tires rotated, and everything's fine. But that's not how it works, and I have to explain to men that that's not the way it is. And I think it takes time, and it takes both of you learning how to talk about things, which I don't know that I'm that great still, but that's we had to do a lot of work. And
It sounds like you both had, when we come out of dysfunction as in adult children of alcoholics or dysfunctional families, we all have a lack of intimacy. We don't know how, and we have our version. And, it's always interesting that when I'm doing premarital counseling, I'm thinking they don't really even know who they're marrying, and they're not going to find out. Dr. Ed Wheat says they're not even going to find out until 5 years down the road. I'm going, and I just go, good luck, but here's what you need to look for. But you both healed together, and that idea is, there are times, Jan, where you had to bear him up and vice versa. And hey, Jan, is the book still available? Both those books, but Door of Hope?
Yes, Door of Hope is still available. Yeah, it's
I
the
think
only
I saw
one.
that on Amazon still,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yes,
still on Amazon, yeah.
it's been in print for 37 years, which is
Wow.
just a miracle that God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like the first Christian book on sexual abuse recovery that we know of, and it was
Wow.
it was quite a. It's cool that it sold a lot of copies over the years.
It's so funny as you guys were talking about, well, you, Don, brought up the sexual stuff. And remember, I don't know if you were still at EV Free when Johnny Erickson Tata spoke there. And
I've heard her several times.
she said, well, it's so funny because, she's paralyzed from the neck down, right? And she said the number one question teenage girls and boys asked her is, how do you have sex? I'm just thinking. And it was in a church. And she said, we can have a pretty normal life. But what I liked about it is she had a healthy view of those things. It didn't shame or guilt her. And maybe the next time, but Jan, as you leave, anyone who's been through the trauma you've been through have to work through two things, shame and guilt. And that's the process, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Because we blame ourselves many times and we bear the shame of what did I do something even to cause it, or was there something that I had a part in? And also, was there a way that I could have prevented this from happening? So we put too much responsibility on ourselves. And, I think the blaming is just what I must have done something to provoke that kind of attention. As I must have, been somewhere.
But learning, when I look back, Pastor Joe said the same thing when he was going through Santa Ana. That's where he said, I was there, years ago, and he said it came up, and he said what really came up for him was, I feel sorry for that little Joe. Yeah. Embracing that child, the inner child, is Dr. Dick Dickinson, wrote that wonderful book on that. And You know, a lot of times in those kinds of things, I would have that person take that child or go to the house as an adult, go into the house and bring the child out.
Wonderful. Yes.
And so you know, the imagery of that is I'm going to take care of myself now. I'm not going to keep that child in that house. And it's really, I'm going to get it out of my memory and I'm going to
Yeah.
move on. Hey,
And-
Dawn, Jen, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Thanks for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
I love you
Rod-
guys.
Thank
Nice
Appreciate
meeting
them.
you. Really
to meet
nice
you.
meeting you. Hope to see
very
you again
much.
soon.
God
We'll
bless
talk some
you.
more football.
We'll talk some more football. I love that.
There you go. St.
Bob
Paul
Noonan.
Sword.
Okay, so for Bob Noonan,
And Roger McDermott.
this is Stepping Out. Don and Jan Frank, God bless you too. Thank
God bless you
Bye-bye.
guys.
Don't grind gears no more. You don't need another score. Don't try to run away. It's the dawn.